Poor Big Hero 6. You know, a lot of Disney movies get accused of a lot of things. Of being corporate cash-ins, of having questionable morals, of not representing the source material well, of having unbalanced scripts, of being emotionally manipulative, of throwing slight changes into old formulas to make people think it's smarter than it is. But one criticism that you almost never see lobbed at a big-budget animated Disney movie is it's unoriginal. There's patterns and traditions for sure, but pretty much every Disney movie changes things up a bit and has a unique structure or dynamic that sets it apart from everything else. Except for Big Hero 6.
On one hand, it tells the typical inventor and creation plot, so the only downside to it is that there's a bit of predictability in this.
Yes, I did find it quite entertaining, but it was also chock full of so many cliches and stereotypical hallmarks of not only a superhero origin film, but also a Disney film, and it was extremely predictable.
It's curious that Big Hero 6's story plays it so, well, safe, but the finale in particular spills into easy convention, with a last-minute MacGuffin inserted to manipulate our tear ducts and nothing more.
That third act, they just don't know what to do, man.
They really don't. And when they don't know what to do, they just do what everybody else has done. And without adding anything new or even that really all that creative to it.
And when it got to the big action scene at the end, it just felt very standard. I knew obviously the kids are going to survive and it's all going to be fine, so there wasn't really that stakes there.
At least Frozen was like, I could kind of understand where it was like
Frozen was some kind of like, you know, cultural phenomenon.
It's a bit of a cultural touchstone kind of thing. Big Hero 6 was just some movie. And it was made by Disney, and so it like.
Did the writers just not care this time? I wouldn't say so. In fact, I think they went out of their way to try to be original and put a twist on things.
Tadashi is here.
No. People keep saying he's not really gone, as long as we remember him. It still hurts.
They tried to be self-aware and clever and meta. They made the scientist guy the bad guy, and the businessman the not bad guy. They really tried to not be cliché, but they failed. Oh, it's embarrassing. So, what's the problem here? What specifically went wrong? There's plenty of people who love this movie and think it's all great. So if I want to tell people that I think it's a big pile of wasted potential, I've got some explaining to do. I think what this movie lacks becomes clear when you put all the pieces together and look at the big picture. So let's start with the most obvious weak point that people criticize the most.
Nothing! No ideas! Useless, empty brain!
The problems with the characters. I mean, they're good characters, they're all sympathetic, the amount of personality packed into every bit of animation is almost overwhelming, and they all have good dialogue. The problem is how they're handled in the story. The villain turns out to be the scientist guy. Well, that's a twist, but why did they do it? Nothing about this guy's character design or mannerism says, I'm a bad guy to me. Even when he's right in the middle of being the bad guy, I don't buy it at all. I don't even care that he betrayed his morals. We only saw him being a nice mentor person in like 2 short scenes at the beginning. The other thing people bring up all the time is the other 4 members of the team and how they could have used more character development. But I'm not sure that's the problem. I mean, development? Try to describe them. Well, Go-Go is confident and proactive, she kind of keeps to herself and can be a little impatient. And Wasabi is thorough and neurotic and careful, Honey Lemon is outgoing and eccentric, and Fred's laid back and a lateral thinker. They're good characters. You could write them in any situation together and wouldn't have to add anything. Maybe their emotional connection to the story could have been played up a little bit more, and it was weird to see them not really do any sciencing after that one scene, but I don't think any of this is the problem. What this team is missing is a straight man, and Hiro is too much younger than them to fill that role. Together, they're a group of easily unhinged crazy people. Every single one of them exponentially adds to the pandemonium. It's amusing, but really unbalanced. It's a very long-lasting and well-known general rule of storytelling that an agent of chaos needs to be paired with an agent of order, or else it'll be really obnoxious. Now, that doesn't really apply to Go-Go, but a general rule for a character like her is she needs someone more mature and balanced to scold her for her mistakes. But because there isn't a character like that, she just doesn't do anything wrong. But of course, at the beginning of the movie, they had a straight man. There was Tadashi. It's widely observed that Disney's killed a lot of characters for a long time, but in pretty much every single instance except this one, it made sense in the narrative. Mufasa's death pushes duty and responsibility onto to Simba, and the whole story is about Simba succeeding his dad's administration. They have Bambi's mom die to force him to be more independent, because the whole movie is about the harshness of nature and the recklessness of drunk college students in the forest posing as hunters. Meanwhile, I think you could have kept Tadashi in the whole movie and everything would have been better. You'd have to change Baymax's role as the surrogate Tadashi, but that wouldn't be hard. He's a versatile character. Now, of course, you can say that the movie is about loss. I mean, I think that's kind of what they were going for, but that's the question. What is this movie about? What were they going for? Now, the meaning of a movie is subjective, so maybe it makes perfect sense to you, but it's really vague and unformed for me. So many pieces of the narrative feel out of place or unfinished. Here's the biggest problem with the movie. The first couple of scenes set you up for a story that's nothing like what it turns out to be. I was so hyped for the first 20 minutes there, then the moment the fire breaks out and Tadashi dies, and from then on, I gawked in utter disbelief that what was actually happening was so completely different than what I had expected. To specifically explain what I'm talking about here, I'm going to break those first 20 minutes down. From the first two shots, I'm immediately laughing out loud from the abject brilliance of the setting. Later, when we're shown cherry blossom trees along a sloping road with a trolley, I was almost on the floor. Big Hero 6 chooses to not beat around the bush at all about being an East-West cultural fusion. It's animation, you could do whatever you want, including collide two entirely different countries into one. Genius moves like that yield even better side effects. There's a sort of gradient of problems you can have when drawing a fictional world. On one side, you can aim for realism/accuracy, which can kind of be boring to make. I mean, all you can do is look at a picture and copy it as best as you can. On the other side, you can make something up from scratch, which can cause instant creative paralysis. You have infinity options. Where do you even begin? The city of San Francisco presents the artists with the best of both worlds. Once you've got that premise, it all comes together in your imagination. I wasn't there, but I'm willing to bet the artists and animators were really stoked the entire time they put this city together. We're then immediately introduced to the underground culture, and then to the main character. Now, I didn't look up any promotional material before watching this movie, and the only teaser I saw was the one of Hiro putting the armor on Baymax, so I didn't know anything about what this movie was going to be. More importantly, there will be kids watching this raw for the first time for decades to come. My point is, the timid, comically innocent front Hiro's putting on here had me at least half fooled. And you can buy that everyone in the room is fooled as well. The hustle is a classic setup, and not one that's overdone enough to be boring, and it's very unique to see it in a kid's story. Tadashi comes in and saves him and has a very efficient character building /exposition dialogue. We're 5 minutes in and we already know that this is a futuristic world that has a deep robot culture and counterculture. After an establishment of their mostly dead family, Hiro sits down in front of his computer to check the time and location for another bot fight, and now everything you need to know about the main character is established. You see, there are a couple of ways to write teenagers. One way is from the perspective of an adult, in which they are mindless annoyances who do nothing but steal their parents' money, then go out to do drugs and get pregnant off-screen. The second way is from the perspective of child wish fulfillment, in which they are everyone's last hope and can do anything. Then there's the odd third option, which I call realistic and interesting. Hiro is smart. He has critical thinking abilities. He has opinions on things. He genuinely tries to act mature. He is a human being. But there are a multitude of things he is simply completely ignorant of, and lacks the introspection and self-awareness to realize that. Tadashi promises to take Hiro to the bot fight himself, and then we witness something that has happened maybe 3 or 4 times in Disney history. An adult being smarter than a child. Reverse psychology is another classic concept in fiction that hasn't been done too much. So by now, we've really been given the idea that this movie will have character motivations and interactions that are more nuanced and interesting than what you'd get from something made for kids. However, by the end of the movie, it's pretty much just, oh, I'm sad about a person I know being died. It makes me want to be angry, but I must do what they would want. I am getting revenge on you. No, don't go. I can't leave you. We saved the day. My favorite part of the whole movie is probably Professor Callahan showing up and joining in on the reverse psychology. If you watch his tone and his body language, he seems like a totally level-headed mentor character, satisfied with his life and accomplishments, and eager to reach out to the next generation. Now, it would be an appropriate character arc if he pushed himself too far or was so desperate to resolve some problem that he compromised his ethics a little bit, and ran the risk of going down the wrong path. But what we get is him instantly chomping at the bit to throw away his career in order to torture and murder someone, and willing to kill his students if they get in the way. And you're led to believe that he was like this before the movie even started, which means that he, or rather the movie, lied right to your face. He's even handing out approval slips to his school 20 seconds before becoming the next Satan. The scene a few minutes earlier when Tadashi introduces Hiro to his scientist classmates as well is an audio-visual masterpiece, in which every line of dialogue and every cut flows into the next one, and is funny, and establishes character, and establishes world building. Now, look at this one panning shot. On a repeat viewing, you can realize from their designs that the characters here are all background only, but especially the first time, it made me assume that a large percentage of the movie was going to be in this university, with the team and other side characters collaborating on projects, and brainstorming and hanging out. But instead, after this, the only sciencing we see is just 3 short montages and just Hiro. In the next scene that shows off the microbots, we can tell that these are going to be an important part of the plot. We're shown a gist of the things that they can do. They can build stuff and they can move you around. So over the course of the entire rest of the movie, what does Callahan do with the microbots? Well, he builds stuff, he destroys some stuff, and he moves around. The animation on them is really cool, but not enough to make me not bored of seeing the same thing every time with no additional creativity. Here's a numerical question. How many robots get invented or introduced after Baymax? The answer is 0. Hiro adapts what the team was working on, and he expands on Baymax's software, but I'd consider that way less than the required minimum amount of robots and inventing in a movie where the first 20 minutes are constant robots and inventing. I mean, there's a portal, but that's not an invention, that's a trope. Now that Hiro is determined to get into the university, we get introduced to what I thought was going to be the theme of the movie. Hard work, and ambition, and perseverance, and facing incredible problems with creative solutions. But then, Tadashi dies, and this whole theme of loss and revenge gets mixed in there and takes up the whole screenplay. I mean, I guess the characters have a goal that they end up succeeding at, so it works by technicality. When all is said and done, the only explicit payoff to this theme is what amounts to 45 seconds of cartoon antics at the end. The brief moment where I thought this was going to be one of my favorite movies was when Robert Callahan and Alistair Cray start bidding for Hiro's affiliation. The way they're talking, you really think this is going to be a big part of the movie. It technically is, but mostly just as a background info dump. Now, this is the part where I think the movie outright deceives the audience. Look at Callahan's expression here. It's a oh you know kind of cocky smile. It's the look you give to a rival, not a mortal enemy. You get the sense that their rivalry has been woven across decades of fierce competition, public and private backstabs, one accusing the other of plagiarism, tabloid rumors, lines in the sand, a duel of values and philosophies. Not just, oh man, you got my daughter killed, blarr! I was expecting this woman over here to be important. You look at her and you can tell what character she's going to be. She's the assistant that Cray has been very good to for a very long time, and she has a deep and complicated affection for him, and she's concerned about Cray's practices and tries to reason with him, and she'll do something to secretly help out the good guys toward the end. But instead, none of that happens because she doesn't say or do anything, because this character doesn't exist outside of this scene, because this movie isn't very well written. All of this first act bait and switch looked to me like the marks of some serious rewrites. So I consulted the special features and was introduced to a Disney creative practice that I hadn't been fully aware of before. They just keep rewriting it as they go.
The way we work at Disney Animation is that, we screen our films every 12 weeks.
We have this big note session afterwards. After a screening, they just give a ton of notes on what they just saw.
And you do it again and again and again and again. And hopefully, by the time you get to your last screen, you really have a good sense of what the movie is.
That's all well and good, and the benefits of that are obvious, but a downside can be that you run the risk of forgetting why you started writing the story in the first place. I noticed when Frozen came out that reviewers had an above average tendency to present alterations of the plot. What if the characters did this instead? What if it was this character instead of that character? Then it would be better. That movie in particular feels like you could rearrange everything that happens in whatever way you want, and it would be just as valid as the version that they went with. How about instead of constantly changing everything along the way, you just do a really good job writing a good story at the beginning? I mean, no, I don't know how to make a Disney movie, but it makes sense to me that you would come up with an idea and then develop that idea until you have a complete story and then start making the movie. There is a degree to which my proposals here are insane. This is supposed to be a superhero movie. Is it reasonable to think you could shove a debate about the ethics and morality of science in there? Well, who's to say a superhero movie can't be about that? What if one of Kray's risky inventions goes haywire and starts wrecking the city and the police department conscripts Callahan and his students to put a stop to it? There's 1,000 ways you could have your cake and eat it here. Having an older brother die was one of the original story beats they came up with, but that makes me wonder why they built up to him being an important part of the movie so much. It's possible that they set up all this stuff, the university activity, Hiro's relationship with Tadashi, the mentorship of Callahan, so that it can be extra sad when none of it gets to happen. In which case, the writers deserve to be punished for their crimes against the popular culture by squandering all that potential, but I'm willing to believe that they were trying to make it more like what I was expecting at some point. Maybe they ended up having difficulties getting everything to fit together and ended up falling back on their conventions. To explain what I'm getting at, let's talk about frantic modern Disney pacing. With Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, it became established that most Disney movies from the classic era up through the 50s should start by setting up the situation, then have a ton of extremely long scenes of side characters doing something unrelated, and then the plot comes back at the end, and then there's a big action scene that resolves everything. With The Little Mermaid, it became established that most Disney movies from the 90s all the way up to today should focus almost entirely on the main plot, and that the plot should be more complicated and have constant twists and turns, and every scene should be constantly moving and doing 20 things at once. Disney movies today tend to play out like one long chase scene, most of the script taking place over the course of a few days. Either of these formulas have their advantages and disadvantages, and both of them have worked really well, but I think the most interesting writing in Disney movies is in the middle period, from the 60s up through the 80s, when they were struggling to figure out and maintain their identity, and did all sorts of experimentation. We had stuff like 101 Dalmatians, which starts by showing you the entire history of this family, then turns into one long high-stakes escort mission. There was Robin Hood, a drawn-out and detailed political incident, and The Sword and the Stone, in which nothing happens except Merlin mentoring Arthur on how to be a good leader until he pulls out the sword at the very end. And it's not like a more balanced narrative structure like this can never come back. Don't forget that duo of cult classic early 2000s Disney films, which have always been praised for their pacing and giving the characters time to relax and develop their relationships better. However, that's not how Big Hero 6 turned out. Even if hypothetically a few early drafts had more developed world building and more dynamic relationships, it probably got scrapped for being too slow or not actiony enough, and they couldn't figure out how to make it exciting. In fact, the director said he was worried the opening scenes would be too much story and not enough action for our 21st century attention spans. But even if you solved all of these pacing issues, there's another even deeper obstacle you have to deal with when writing a story like this. Let me put it this way. Fiction tends to have problems with authority. The whole reason it's impressive that Hiro graduated high school at 13 is because he went above and beyond what society and everyone around him expected of him. The reason it's troubling that he's occupied with bot fighting is because he's doing less than what society and everyone around him expects of him. He had all these people he looked up to, people who could scold him and manipulate him because they're more mature. But that's all at the beginning of the movie. In the middle, all of these forces and structures break down, and by the end, it no longer really matters how old Hiro is, because there's no one left to compare him to. The guy who wanted to take advantage of him is useless, his professor turns out to be a dumb evil guy, the police won't do anything to help, his upper classmates just go along with him without being overly protective of him like you'd think they would, his brother's dead, his parents are super dead, and his aunt doesn't know anything about computers. He's now everyone's last hope, doing everything by himself. He could have been written to be 35, and you wouldn't have to change a single line of dialogue for the entire third act of the movie. All those authority figures, all those people who Hiro has to answer to, are all eventually boiled down to be a good person and don't take revenge. That oversimplification of society and social pressures is what people are referring to when they say Big Hero 6 plays it safe with a predictable cliche storyline. I mean, can you imagine how hard it would be to keep track of what Tadashi thinks of Hiro's actions, what his professor wants him to do, what his senpai Fukusu Uke think of him, and then to weave all of that into a flowing narrative? This is why fiction tends to have problems with authority. I think so many stories eventually default to one lone hero with his trusty sidekicks fighting the one bad guy because it's easier to write. Well hey, if you don't think it's possible for there to be an animated production that has a really cool futuristic society that constantly introduces new ideas, and has fun and enjoyable characters, and has satisfying action scenes, go watch Ghost in the Shell Standalone Complex. And if you say there's no way you could take something complex and meant for adults like that and crunch it down into something simple enough for kids to understand while still being interesting, well, isn't that the kind of thing Disney is supposed to figure out?